watercolor set from a dollar store and Winsor and Newton, which is almost something like $124. Is it really difficult to paint with dollar store watercolor? Let's see. Here is my $1 watercolor. I have 8 colors here and I'm going to paint these one flower with this one and the other one with my Winsor & Newton professional watercolors. I'm so excited to test this out, and the beginning is very surprising actually, because I really like how vibrant these colors are, but also I realized that they are not blending in each other as well as I thought they would. So this was the first challenge that I saw. I didn't like how they blended and how they bled into each other. While I was doing the wet and wet method, the red I have in this set was a little bit cool red, and in order to warm that up I added some yellow in it, and I think it worked out. Because I don't have any black in the set, in order to get dark red I added some brown and blue into my red so that I can get some more darker shades of this red. The other thing that I experienced was you can do wet on dry method very easily with this paint. It wasn't difficult at all. But in order to get the shade that you're looking for, you might have to do 2 or 3 layers, whereas in the professional watercolor, 1 layer might be enough. Well, 1 layer is never enough for a watercolor artist, but you know what I mean. The pigments are much better and much stronger. Here in the leaf section, you can see that I used both blue and different shades of green. I only had 1 green in my set, but I added some yellow into it to get a lighter shade. I added some blue for the darker, and I also add some more brown for the olive green. You can create your own green shade by just mixing with other colors, and it was not a big problem for me. I was able to mix with other colors very easily. And for the highlights, I added some clean water here, as you can see, but it was not very effective. So I went in with my towel, and that really worked out for the highlights. One thing I want to tell you that with the cheaper paint, it is more difficult to lift up the paint when you make a mistake, because they dry faster than the professional watercolor. This is what I realized. Here you can see that I added more and more green, and for the darker shades I added more blue into that brown and some green. And for the outside borders I used my very small brush, and it actually worked, and that was very surprising for me. But one thing that I also noticed was I had less control over this paint than the professional paint that I normally use. So with Winsor and Newton, what I realized right away was how easily my paint was bleeding into the other one. When I tried to blend them with another layer of clean water, they blended in each other perfectly. And for the darker red, I had black in my set, so it was easier to create this dark red shade for me. One more thing to tell you guys. When I work with professional watercolor right here, you can see the border lines are much more prominent than the other one. So this was something I really liked about the professional watercolors. And as I go, I used my cooler shade of red, because this is what I used in the first one, and I added some yellow again to warm it up, and it worked out fine. Whenever I made a mistake or it was overflowing, I used my tissue with no problem at all. And when I'm correcting my mistakes, I had used my towel a lot, and that gave the exact result that I was hoping for. So for the leaves, you can see that I added different shades of green here as well. I did the exact same thing I did in the first one. I mixed it with blue, I mixed it with yellow, I mixed it with brown. This allowed me to use different shades of green here. Here you can see me applying wet in wet method, and I think it created a much more vibrant result in this one. Don't get me wrong, I think the results in the first one were pretty vibrant as well. But the second one mixed in each other much better, keeping their vibrancy. I think this was the most important part for me. Okay, I'm about to finish the flowers, and the pink is right there. And now I'm doing the stem with my dark brown, and I'm gonna add some black into that dark brown. And I'm excited to do the dark green part on the leaf in a second. And I'm really gonna see if it's going to blend in or it's just going to look like a stain, a black stain on the leaf, just like it looks on the left side, because I really didn't like how it looks on the left side. So I'm adding all these dark green parts on the leaf for the darkest shades. For the shadows, it looks like it's going to leave a more natural look this time. But the only way to understand it, of course, to wait till it dries, and then we will see. After I finish this, I'm gonna go ahead and do all these boundaries with my dark green so that they look exactly the same. I think after that dark green dried, you can see that it is much better looking on this flower than the first flower. And also the boundaries look like much more realistic than the first one. I felt like, I don't know why, but I had more control over my paint in the second one than the first one. I think this would be the biggest difference for me. So let's sum it up. The first one looks great, vibrant colors, but I didn't like the boundaries between my flowers and the negative space. But in the second one, I liked how the water created those beautiful looking boundaries. Both of them had really vibrant colors, but I think the second one blended in each other much better than the first one. Here you can see all the differences. When it comes to leaves, you can see that black part blended into dark green part much better on this one than the other one. In overall, when you look at the leaves, those blues and greens mixed in each other much better on the second one than the first one. You can see the differences clearly when you zoom in. Here, the darkest part of the leaf doesn't look very natural, does it? Although I used their wet in wet method as well. But in the second one, you see that it blended in much better. So in overall, you can see that they're both beautiful, but if you are doing a commission work, definitely a professional watercolor should be your choice. And especially when you look from a different angle, you can see the darkest parts that I added more dark shade are shiny, but in the second one, you don't see that shine effect, which I really liked. So if you're doing some commission work, definitely this is a plus for you when you work with professional watercolors. Also, if you know the techniques, if you have the control over your brush, it doesn't really necessarily mean that you should only use very expensive paint. You can still use a cheap paint and use the techniques that you know. It's gonna take you a longer time. It's gonna make you sweat much more, but you can get the almost exact same result as you can see here. But I highly recommend you to use professional watercolors once you learn the techniques, because it matters. Which one is your favorite, guys? Do you think the $1 watercolor looks good for its price? Let me know in the comments. I had compared Van Gogh and Winsor & Newton professional watercolor before. If you're interested in checking them out, it's right here. Do you have to pay that much money, or an affordable one would do the same work? You'll see.